We are not alone. We never are when love walks among us. Lori Gard, a blogger who wrote a post about self-love, speaks of this statement and the time when she heard it and just stopped in her tracks. We are not alone. We never are, not when love walks with us. That song, There Is a Love, that song we sang together after the body blessing just a second ago, has that same idea threaded through it. There's a love holding me. There's a love holding all that I am. There's a love holding all. I rest in that love. To rest. To rest in love, a larger universal love or the love of God. I assume you've all been around people who articulate a sense of sort of this faithful accompaniment in their lives, whether it's the sense of being held in relation to God or a higher power, a community, the environment, or the universe. I've been with friends and colleagues and family members who find like such peace in this theology, and they don't feel alone. And they do feel that love in the unquestionable sense that they are whole and holy despite all of their human faults and challenges. I personally link into the universe. That's mine, of that list. Our Unitarian Universalist tradition holds a belief in a God that's benevolent, that leans into love and does not punish. Our Christian predecessors and our current Christian Unitarian Universalist journey with a God who loves them and one that does not in any way punish them. I shared a brief poem in my weekly video this week. It's called Late Fragment. It's one that comes to me whenever I hear that word beloved and think of myself. It's written by Raymond Carver. It's a really little piece, and I think it's even a tad bit awkward, but I also think it's super beautiful. This is how it goes. Oh, actually, before I read it, I was thinking about the voice in this little fracture of a poem. To me, it sounds like there's a voice of something greater talking to the person in this poem. That might be God or the universe. It might be some unknown mystery, something that whoever wrote this relates to on some level. So here comes the poem. Did you get what you wanted from this life even so? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on the earth. If I could raise a magic wand and make one huge magic spell, it would be to make all people and all creatures on the earth understand and deeply feel their belovedness. Love, as we've heard this month, is at the center of every faith tradition, and love of self, the topic of today, is a cornerstone of that greater love. If you think about it, most of the great religions focus on three central ideas: love of God or some greater mystery, love of self, and love of neighbor. But how can we love our neighbors like ourselves if we don't love ourselves? I think all of us have experienced times in our life, even if they're just moments, when we felt unlovable. I think Reverend Diana got people to raise their hands about some negative self-talk that might be going on. Poets and psychologists and theologians and philosophers and artists, they've all thought and prayed and written and created artwork and writings about such feelings. There are universal feelings, although with depression or anxiety or trauma or societal oppression impacting many of us, the depth of this kind of self-loathing and self-criticism differs among us. We are, after all, social beings, and we're impacted by what is around us and what happens to us, as well as we're influenced by our own sort of spirits and brain chemistry. I'd wave that wand to give everybody a sense of their own belovedness, because when one loves oneself and can rest in that love, good things come from it. Relationships, families, communities, countries that would be fueled by love instead of hate and just judgment and fear. That kind of community could change the world. We are humans and prone to messages, and they slip into our heads and our hearts and our minds, and they convince us of things that are fundamentally not true often. Whether these messages come from our family of origin, education, upbringing, or past religious life or relationships, we people tend to let the negative dominate our psyches, and we pay far less attention to the positive. And you know how it is often said that whether you're a person who's a public figure in social media or a person who just interacts with people and gets responses, if you got like 10 positive comments and 1 negative, the humans in us tend to focus on that negative. I hate that. I guess we're just hardwired like that, and it's not a great way to go through life. So part of our mission, our promises to one another in this congregation, is to live with those values behind us: courageous love, mindful interdependence, and authentic curiosities. These noble values for those of us who come with obstacles of our own fear and anger and sense of isolation and even judgmentalness versus openness and curiosity, those are hard values to live by. We come each week, whether we connect here or another way with the MSUS community, with our flaws and our tenderness and our vulnerability and our humanness. These values, as clear as they sound, are really purely aspirational. Jackie Lewis, who is an African-American minister who speaks of revolutionary love, she kind of unpacks this idea of self-love, and she says that in the Greek language, love of neighbor and love yourself are connected by the word os, O-S, which is like an equal sign. She said, this suggests that we are called to love the self and the neighbor in the exact same way. And when we don't love ourselves, it's impossible to love our neighbors. She points out that the story embedded in teachings across faith and religion is that we are part of a mutually beneficial web of connection. That's part of one of our principles of well-being and of love. She says that the root of this connection is empathy. And the result of empathy are things we want more of in the world: kindness, compassion, respect, and understanding. She speaks of a fierce love, understanding that we are all somewhat quirky and flawed individuals. She says this fierce love delights in the particularities of who we are. And we are all rather particular. I know I am myself. And some of those parts don't always feel fiercely lovable. Let's sing. I was laughing internally while we were singing, thinking I'm like purposely trying to get an earworm in your ear, so you leave today with that song sort of stuck in your body. So empathy is something we often think of, something that we think we need to feel towards others. It's a little harder to turn that empathy towards ourselves. What about self-compassion and self-understanding and self-loving kindness? I heard a person speaking about how that they believed that the negative voices in her head was like this critical narrator that accompanied her so much of her life, and that it came out of this kind of false belief that if she hated herself or sort of hurt herself psychologically, she would make herself better. So she actually thinks like this voice originated from perhaps a positive reason, but is not a pretty voice. She said it's sort of a belief that self-criticism is a mode to self-improvement, that pointing out our faults is the way to self-correct and to be better in the world. We allow that negative voice to be the dominant voice in the head, the one that tells us that we're too fat and we need to start dieting, or the one that tells us we're not organized enough and we need to get ourselves together, or the one that tells us we haven't achieved enough and makes us feel like our lives don't have enough meaning. Whatever it is, the negative voice tends to get a lot of playtime in our very human hearts and minds. Some of us live with the false belief that if we love ourselves, we're going to become arrogant, self-focused, indulgent. But when you really think about it, I think this is really true. When you are kind of hating on yourself, or that critical voice has the main stage, it's actually hard to pay attention to anything else. I think it has like a higher volume level or something. I don't know what that is. Obsessive critical thoughts, that running dialogue of shoulds or however your voice shows up, it can really dominate one's waking hours. I find when I'm like grounded in a sense of well-being and self-love, my heart and spirit actually become expansive, and I'm able to be present in the moment and to connect with others. That voice on my shoulder or in my ear is silenced, and there seems to be room to hear the voices of others, all you beautiful people, and to listen deeply. Karen Lowenthal, a master certified life coach, she talks about how there's this convoluted sense about how we drive ourselves to be more productive by not liking ourselves, kind of like what that other woman had said. She believes that many of us are tied into this narrative that if we liked ourselves, we'd never get anything done. I found this idea kind of parallel to the people of more conservative faiths who think, why would anybody do anything good if we didn't have the fire and brimstone fear put into us? Why behave good here on earth if there isn't a chance of hell? And we UUs don't buy into that, the UUs. We Unitarian Universalists don't buy into that. But there is a bit of that in us. I know that when I don't like myself, I get this condescending, critical voice that speaks to myself like a misguided, guilty child. Come on, why aren't you getting to that? Look at your room. That would be my office. You want to do what? Instead of putting your paperwork in? Cara argues that this innate technique of being mean to yourself actually holds one back. I think about interacting with a young child or even a pet that we love, and how much more happens when we shower them with love versus punishment. When we see them as whole and holy, even when they're having a tantrum or they devoured something we love. When we love them, not in spite of their shortcomings, but including and embracing their shortcomings. And yet we don't always do this for ourselves. Let's face it, we're all going to have some self-loathing and some critical voice within ourselves. I think that comes with the experience of being human. But self-love helps as a counterweight, some immunity, some antidote to that self-critic. So Cara Lowenthal also speaks about these 3 myths about self-love that sometimes get in our way. She said the first is that one I've already said, that if you love yourself, you're going to become self-obsessed. And she points out that that's actually the opposite, like what I just shared. When we're not listening to that negative voice, the world opens up and we can get engaged and connect. And then she said the second myth is that we think of self-love as something that we can accomplish. Something that is, when it's done the right way, it will alleviate sadness and self-doubt. I can get really tricked on this. I think this is part of the white supremacy culture. Like, we can get self-love right. She said, we almost think of it as like a software that will be like our exit ramp off from the human experience. But self-love, she said, is about loving yourself through the whole messy, complex, sometimes not so pretty human experience. There's no way to avoid all that stirs within and among and beyond us. And the last myth, she says, is that self-love we view sometimes as a destination, that if you get there and you get it right, it's going to just be permanent. She says self-love is just like any other relationship. It has its ups, It has its downs. It will have its seasons. It is not a one and done situation. So if those are your myths, just chuck them out. As a person who spent much of my formative young adult lives in 12-step rooms, I also believe that having some sense of a greater love, a greater universe, God, higher power, something beyond ourselves is important in feeling beloved. Something greater than ourselves, even if it's a community like this or a tree or the air in your back, and the air that surrounds you, the wind, that we are indeed children of the universe and beloved. I think that earworm's almost stuck. Theologian and liberal Catholic Henri Nouwen writes about his own journey with belovedness and lack thereof. He says, yes, there is that voice, the voice that speaks from above and within and that whispers softly or declares loudly, you are beloved. On you my favor rest. It certainly is not easy to hear that voice in a world filled with voices that shout, you're no good, you're ugly, you're worthless, you're despicable, you are nobody unless you can demonstrate the opposite. These negative voices, he said, are so loud and persistent that it's easy to believe them. That's the great trap. It's the trap of self-rejection. Over the years, I have come to realize that the greatest trap in our life is not success, popularity, power, but self-rejection. When we have come to believe in the voices that call us worthless and unlovable, then success, popularity, and power are perceived as attractive solutions. The real trap, however, is self-rejection, and I'm constantly surprised at how quickly I give in to this temptation. As soon as somebody accuses me or criticizes me, maybe we could say just looks at me funny, as soon as I am rejected, left alone, or abandoned, I find myself thinking, well, that proves once again that I am nobody. Instead of taking a critical look at the circumstances or trying to understand my own and other limitations, I tend to blame myself, not just for what I did, but for who I am. My dark side says, I'm no good. I deserve to be pushed aside, forgotten, rejected, and abandoned. It's quite a little statement. He's such a lovely man. You can find him sometimes on podcasts, and like to hear this wise, loving man who's lived a long life say these words, it's pretty powerful. I deserve to be pushed aside, forgotten, rejected, and abandoned. I speak often about what we speak of or think of is what we feed, and what we feed grows. And this is true with our thoughts. When we feed this critical voice, it grows, it takes up residency, and it refuses to move out. There are a number of practices that have proven useful to counter such voices, but it seems like when I was kind of listening to things, one of the main pieces is to be able to recognize this inner critic and to be able to hear its narrative as separate from your core being. Some people give the voice a name of a villain or imagine it sitting on your shoulder or somewhere else. And when it's kind of separated in this way, you can be in dialogue with it. I had a therapist speak to me once about parts, and she said that we all have these parts of ourselves, and no one part is the whole of us. So if one can see this critical voice as just a part, it loses its fullness and its totality in directing our lives and impacting our spirits and emotions. Another thing, which you probably have heard of numerous times in this congregation, is affirmations. And I know for some that feels a little touchy-feely. But you can't hold a negative thought and a positive thought at the same time. So when you're giving yourself positive thoughts, the bad ones need to take a seat. They need to move to the sidelines. They need to sit out for a while. And when we care about those positive thoughts, when we have those kind of feelings that are empathetic, we let that love enter our minds and hearts, our body chemistry actually changes. You know, when you're feeling really negative towards yourself, you can feel that constriction maybe in your stomach, maybe in your heart, maybe in your body, maybe your armpits start sweating, whatever. But when you start to put the positive things in, you can actually feel breathing shift, your heart shift. We're less stressed. We're not fighting internally with ourselves, and we can rest in the love and understanding of ourselves. So I thought we would do just a short little exercise together. You might see there's little tables over here. I want us to create something together that could help all of us know we're not alone. I'm going to have Colleen, our admin, kind of take this and turn it into something I can send out. I want something that we can kind of wrap ourselves in when we get that critical voice coming out, something that holds a resounding love and a sense of being beloved.